So, sweetie, let's bring this into parenting.
Okay.
So, I mean, I don't want to gloss over how important this one teeny part of the book is. If we just did E plus R equals O as a parent, and every time our kids, not every time, our kids walk in the door, something happened out there in the world, it sucks. I get scared and I want to fix or whatever. If I can instead not try to fix and really
Respond from a
ground
full
myself,
place.
center
Hmm.
myself, and then respond from a place of not fixing, but listening and compassion, then the outcome of that exchange between me and my daughter would be completely different. Sweetie?
Well, yeah, and and I'm like tacking this on. This isn't really a thing, but like, equals outcome, and then I would put another equals relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
because when those accumulate over time, the event plus your response to it, and then the outcome, then that will dictate how your relationship goes. That will dictate whether your children talk to you when they're struggling with something, or when they're not feeling confident, or when they do need support. Because if your response, or I should say, if your reaction is judgmental, or doubting of them, or blaming, or just so the emotions are not regulated, or you're not agile with them, then this is where parents misunderstand. They'll say, but my kid knows I love them, they should come to me. But that ERO, if that happens over and over again, where they're getting this feeling of shame or guilt after talking
Or
to you, or
judgment.
judgment, they know that's in there. They're like, that's not the person I'm going to. I'm not going to go talk to my parents about this. I'm going to go somewhere else. So that's just another part of relationship too, or a part of what you were talking about with teams, is who you are to these people, not just parents, but the coach, the manager. Are you someone that is trusted and dependable, or are you someone that they're trying to avoid? Right.
Yeah, and I think, sorry to interrupt there, Kathy.
No,
That's
please.
one of my natural reactions and the poor responses.
No, please.
But I just, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, coaching and parenting are very similar.
Yep.
And the one thing that we always talk about is, when I go to coach a team, um I always call it the trust bank, right? Like you have to build a relationship that can bear the burden of truth as a parent and as a coach, 100%. And so when you start, right, it's like, think of it as a bank. Your balance is zero. And I think it's so important, and especially as a parent, right, to that you're making deposits early on, because you're going to have to make withdrawals, right? And I think as a coach, it's the same thing. A lot of coaches step in and they start making withdrawals, and they wonder why the kids pull away or their families pull away, and there's no trust, right? And so it's the same thing as a parent. And so early on, I remember when I was, coaching, and I was coaching 15, 16-year-olds, and my kids were really little. And, I was complaining to some of the parents, probably because I hadn't slept or, whatever. And they just like looked at me like, small kids, small problems, big kids,
Yeah.
big problems, and it's always stuck in my head. And I think my wife and I have worked very hard with our children to build that relationship and that trust, so that, when we get the phone call now that at, midnight says, hey, can you come pick me up? I need a ride home. Yeah, there are no questions. Like, yep, we'll be right there. And that's the kind of thing that just, I think is so important. And what I see a lot from parents is they don't make those deposits, and then they can't make the withdrawals. And so they either blow up the relationship trying to make them, or they just say yes to everything, and they don't give kids the boundaries that they need.
So have you been able to cultivate that trust where they call at midnight and you don't answer questions, and they will call if or when they need that support, friends driving drunk, whatever the case is,
Yeah.
you and your wife have made enough deposits where that will actually happen.
Yeah, and it has happened, and it happens, and again, we've done it. And if it happened 3 nights a week, now there's problems,
Right.
right? But if it happens, once every 2 months or whatever, like, okay, well, let's go fix that. And then, our kids are pretty open about, well, hey, this is what happened, and thank you for calling us. That
Well,
was a
so it's so
great
cool
decision.
because
Yes.
to your point, a lot of times people weaponize something Cathy and I will say, which is, exactly the example we're talking about. Whereas if your kid needs support, being called at midnight, not asking questions, then, a parent will say, well, what if they do that 5 nights a week? Like, yeah, well, then it's a different situation. But people tend to just, go all in on one thing, and it's never all in, sweetie.
And I was going to say, and I still am like, but it's the same answer, because if my child was struggling with something consistently, I still need that same relationship to have an influence in that possibly very difficult time for them. So I think we really, and this so connects to sports, John, this is why I love these conversations with you, because we so quickly go to this authoritarian or this like rigid or dictatorship mentality of like, well, things are going off the rails, so I am going to rein it in and no one's going to do this and we're not going to talk about this. And we go, and I feel like it's very fear driven. And that because we do really run to, like Todd said, if something goes wrong, but what if this happens all the time? And I got a whole, and there's no trust in human beings. And I'm not just talking about our own individual children, but humans, that's not how we're wired. We would like to be successful. If we're struggling, we don't want to be struggling. Like, we would like support, but it's very fear-based. Like, and I'm sure you find this with, with parents, but also with coaches, that mentality of I've got to keep control versus have relationship.
100%. And I think this whole, growth happens when you struggle, right?
Yeah.
That's when growth happens. And our natural inclination as parents from the first moment is to protect our kids from, right? As soon as they get sick, they're not sleeping, we want to comfort them, right? And I mean, I think that's why like the hardest moment, one of the hardest moments as a parent is the first time you're like, no, I'm going to lay here and let them cry it out and sleep through the night, or whatever it is, and it's like, oh my God. So in all these moments of growth, that's when struggle happens. That's when it's difficult. And as a parent, I think you're always navigating, when do I intervene versus when do I step back and help my kids see, well, what's good about this, right? What's good about your hard teacher, your difficult coach, whatever, versus, oh, something's crossed the line into dangerous. And now as the adult, I step in.
Yes.
Because I know better, and so you're constantly doing that. And again, you get it wrong.
Yeah.
Sometimes as well. But
well, that's what's funny. Parenting is an art form. Like, there's no rules. Cathy and I have been doing a podcast for however many years.
13 years.
There's no like, okay, this is how you do it, because there are times when we do have to step in and step into our leadership and maybe exert a little more control. But it's very rare that would happen. Sweetie, what are you going to say?
Well, and I was going to say that's the layered thing here, is just as we are watching our children struggle, or we're trying to figure out when to step in, and we're struggling in the moment as well. Is this the time that I step in? Ooh, I stepped in too quickly, or I stepped in too late. And then sometimes you glean lessons from that, like, next time, but really it's not the next time. You may need to do it differently. There is no, and this is the thing about human beings, that there are no hard and fast rules. There's things that we do and that we play with. And I like the word art. You really have to be agile. You have to be an athlete, right?
Well, John,
you have to figure out how to do this.
John said that growth happens through struggle. And I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm getting to the point in my life where I don't think any learning happens through success. Now, maybe that's not true. Maybe there is some learning, but as we talk about these challenges as being parents, like, if we could reframe, whenever I get reactive and my kids come home with a problem or whatever, and I don't do it well, then it's, I could be like, oh, poor me. Or I could be like, this is an opportunity for me to visit this experience through a different lens or with a different energy. So here's my question. Do you think all growth happens through struggle, or can we also grow through when you score that goal, or when your kid tells you that they love you with all their heart, which, still waiting for those types of conversations to happen. Our kids are so self-involved.
They say that to you.
They do.
I was just say, don't throw them under the bus.
It just doesn't happen as often as we want them to as
when
parents.
We're directing them, they're not like, thank you so much for the direction, but they say they.
Exactly. That's true. So does any growth happen through success, or is it all through struggle?
Well, I think anytime you have success, it's not like, oh, I just won the lottery, right? I didn't randomly pick some numbers and then it happened, right? So if I had success on the sports field, maybe in that moment, right? Usually what happens is validation, right? And that's where I think the coach or the parent can step in instead of saying, wow, look at you, you're so talented, right? This is when we talk about growth mindset, right? It's not, it's like, wow, you've been working so hard and today it all came together for you. And let's connect where's all the threads of those days when you had tears in your eyes, when you struggled, when you were upset. That's what happened to today. And you can't have one without the other. I mean, we tell the teams that I coach or they work with, like, if you're going to feel the moment of the most incredible victory, you also have to be prepared for those moments of utter heartbreak. One does not happen without the other once you're in the arena in sport. And in relationships. I mean, if you're gonna fall in love, you're gonna also get your heart broken.
Well, and along those same lines, you shared, I appreciated this small story in the book where it was talking about learning through failure. And you had an experience in high school, John, where you had a teacher hand you back a paper that you thought you did well on, and you got a big fat F on it. Can you share that story?
Yeah, sure. And so what we call these things rule of one moments, right? One person, one comment, one time can change your life. And I don't know that I've ever met anyone who doesn't have a moment like this, from a teacher, a friend, a coach, trusted colleague, or whatever. And so, yeah, that was 11th grade. Brother Jeff Peterson. I went to a Catholic high school on Long Island, and I got a big fat red F on my paper, and I was a good student. I was just lazy. And I said, Brother Jeff, like, there's no way this paper's an F. I know it's better than other people's. And he was like, John, I didn't give you an F based on what they can write. I gave you an F based on what you can write. And this is crap. Sorry, it's a non-explicit podcast. Yeah, I won't use his exact words, but this was the 80s and whatever. And so then he goes, then he grabs my books and he throws them out the third story window and he goes, get out of my classroom and don't come back until you're willing to give me your best effort, because you are a great writer. And that was the first time in my life I ever thought of myself as a good writer, right? That was the moment, right? And I've not only dedicated my books to Brother Jeff, right, who's no longer in the priesthood. He actually is a vice president of a college now, and we reconnected a couple years ago and everything like that. And he had read my books, and he was like, again, here's the thing. He didn't remember this moment. The moment that changed my life was part of his normal day. He had no idea, but this is the power that we wield as teachers and coaches and parents as well. The interesting part about that as well is, I went home that day. I was pissed. I was angry at Brother Jeff and how dare he and whatever. And I remember going home and, complaining to my dad, my dad was, the Irish Catholic from the Bronx and, New York City firefighter. And I just blah, 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 complained. He goes, was he right? And I was like, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, is what he said true? I'm like, well, yeah. He goes, then what are you complaining about? Right. And I think of today, how many parents would have been on the phone with the principal or the board of the school board and fire the teacher. And, and it's like, and it just took my dad to be like, this is struggle. This is an important lesson. Right. And it could have totally been missed if my dad in that moment didn't say, well, was he right?